Hello, everybody. Welcome to Book by Book. And today we're going to be walking through 3 chapters of Jeremiah. We're going to be in chapters 37, 38, and 39. And this is more narrative, less poetic. And so we're working toward the eventual fall of Jerusalem. And so the events of these passages are late in the reign of Zedekiah, and they follow a fairly chronological order, as opposed to last week where there was some back and forthness. This is just kind of straight through. And then we're also going to see a surprising support for Jeremiah from somebody that we might not have thought would support Jeremiah. So so let's just jump in. Chapter 37, verses 1 through 5 is where we will start. Zedekiah, son of Josiah, was made king of Judah by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. He reigned in place of Jehoiakim, son of Jehoiakim. Neither he nor his attendants nor the people of the land paid any attention to the words the Lord had spoken through Jeremiah the prophet. King Zedekiah, however, sent Jehukal, son of Shelemiah, with the priests Zephaniah, son of Maaseiah, to Jeremiah the prophet with this message: "Please pray to the Lord our God for us." Now Jeremiah was free to come and go among the people, for he had not yet been put in prison. Pharaoh's army had marched out of Egypt, and when the Babylonians who were besieging Jerusalem heard the report about them, they withdrew from Jerusalem. All right, so we're getting the first verse here is putting us in the place and like reestablishing the scene for us and reminding us that Zedekiah was a puppet king, essentially. He was installed by the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar after Jehoiakim tried to lead a rebellion against Babylon. And so Jehoiakim was captured, and Zedekiah was put in place. And this Zedekiah's original name was Mattaniah, and so he's Jehoiakim's uncle. And so with this set in place, then we also are reminded that none of Zedekiah's attendants or leaders paid any attention to anything that Jeremiah said at all. And so they are rejecting his message. But so now, knowing that Zedekiah rejects Jeremiah's message, they come to him asking him to pray, which is interesting because so far the kings, most of them were treating Jeremiah as somebody who was pro-Babylon, because he was telling them, and he'll tell them more again tonight in what we'll look at, to surrender. Don't fight against Babylon. It will go better if you just surrender to Babylon. And so it's interesting here that Zedekiah sends these messengers to go and ask Jeremiah to pray to the Lord for them. And part of the reason that maybe they thought coming to pray would have been good is, they may have respected Jeremiah just in general. He's a prophet. We should ask all the prophets. But also there is this shift that is happening at this time where Egypt is, causing some trouble for Babylon. And the trouble causing leads Babylon to leave Jerusalem for a little bit. The armies of Babylon lift their siege from around the city to go and deal with the Egypt problem. And so maybe they thought there was a little bit more of a reason that to seek the Lord. Maybe the Lord had relented from the destruction against Jerusalem that he had been talking about throughout Jeremiah's message. And so they're like, "Will you go pray to the Lord to discern for us if there is if this is the end of the siege, and ask the Lord to relent." And so that might have been part of why they went to ask Jeremiah for prayer. So yeah, it's just an interesting place where they are looking at the prophets as people that can be used for their own benefit, essentially. And that's one of the problems that Jeremiah has been saying about the prophets is they were listening to the false prophets because they told them what they wanted to hear. But now that it seems like things might be better for a little bit, maybe Jeremiah is got something good to say as well. Maybe he'll pray and the Lord will continue to do this relenting work. So how does he respond? It picks up in verse 6. The word of the Lord came to Jeremiah the prophet. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Tell the king of Judah, who sent you to inquire of me, Pharaoh's army, which has marched out to support you, will go back to its own land, to Egypt. Then the Babylonians will return and attack this city. They will capture it and burn it down. This is what the Lord says. Do not deceive yourselves, thinking the Babylonians will surely leave us. They will not. Even if you were to defeat the entire Babylonian army that is attacking you, and only wounded men were left in their tents, they would come out and burn this city down. So the Lord is the message is like, you know what, this is just a little bit of a break, but it's not over. What is happening is going to happen. The Babylonians are going to destroy the city, and this is after a season where the people have been harassed by the Babylonians, like in the countryside, and it's like the siege is closing. The people in Jerusalem are weak. Their resources are depleted. There's really not much that they have going for them. And so the end here is like, even the wounded will defeat your entire city. They're going to burn the whole thing down. And so the Lord is set in this path against the city of Jerusalem and against Zedekiah and his leadership. So do not deceive yourselves. It's very easy when there is a little bit of good news to say this good news is the best news and we're going to keep on with the good news. But here Jeremiah is reminding them, like, no, you cannot assume that this is going to be good and easy for you. The destruction is coming. So verse 11, after the Babylonian army had withdrawn from Jerusalem because of Pharaoh's army, Jeremiah started to leave the city to go to the territory of Benjamin to get his share of the property among the people there. But when he reached the Benjamin gate, the captain of the guard, whose name was Arijah, son of Shelemiah, son of Hananiah, arrested him and said, "You are deserting to the Babylonians." "That's not true," Jeremiah said. "I am not deserting to the Babylonians." But Arijah would not listen to him. Instead, he arrested Jeremiah and brought him to the officials. They were angry with Jeremiah and had him beaten and imprisoned in the house of Jonathan the secretary, which they had made into a prison. All right, so with the siege lifted, a few weeks ago, we looked at Jeremiah buying a plot of land as essentially as the redeeming family member. He's the last in line to be able to buy this land from a family member who may have been broke and in debt, and so trying to get out of that debt. So Jeremiah buys it, and he bought that land as a sign to the people to say, yes, destruction is coming now, but restoration is coming later. And so he's like, I'm investing in this land to show you that God is not done with his people. And so here, this leaving the city as Babylon lifts the siege for a little while, this is the opportunity for Jeremiah then to go and actually see the land that he bought, to go and maybe finish some of the things that needed to be finished for the transfer. And so that's all Jeremiah is doing. He's just being a normal person, doing normal things, going to go check out his land. And so the captain of the guard, Arijah, had him arrested because his message seems really pro-Babylon. And so he's probably leaving to go and join the Babylonians. But, Jeremiah's like, he knows he's not deserting, but he is just a guy, and they're all in power, and he's thrown in prison, beaten and thrown in prison. And this house of Jonathan, the secretary, sorry, I had a note about it. I thought I had a note about it. Okay. Well, yeah. So the fact that it was the house of Jonathan suggests that prisons were not a very common thing in ancient Israel. We read about prison in Egypt when Joseph is in prison, but the law code in the Old Testament in the Pentateuch doesn't actually have any stipulations about putting anybody in prison. The justice was like restorative justice, not retributive justice. And so if you stole something, you were supposed to pay it back with a percentage on top. If you accidentally killed somebody's animal, you were supposed to restore the animal with your own with a percentage on top. It's all restorative. It was never there are no laws to say if somebody accidentally kills a neighbor, they are going to be in prison for 5 to 20 years. That was not a part of the law code. And so converting somebody's house into a prison is an indication that they were not really prone to using prison. And so here Jeremiah is put in some kind of prison in a guy's house. But they have this next section shows that there are some prison-like spaces, these dungeons here in verse 16. Jeremiah was put into a vaulted cell in a dungeon where he remained a long time. Then King Zedekiah sent for him and had him brought to the palace, where he asked him privately, "Is there any word from the Lord?" "Yes," Jeremiah replied, "you will be delivered into the hands of the king of Babylon." Then Jeremiah said to King Zedekiah, "What crime have I committed against you or your attendants or this people that you have put me in prison? Where are your prophets who prophesied to you? The king of Babylon will not attack this land. But now, my lord, the king, please listen. Let me bring my petition before you. Do not send me back to the house of Jonathan the secretary, or I will die there." King Zedekiah then gave orders for Jeremiah to be placed in the courtyard of the guard and given a loaf of bread from the street of the bakers each day until all the bread in the city was gone. So Jeremiah remained in the courtyard of the guard. So this vaulted cell in a dungeon was probably a smallish room that had a little bit of a peak, but most folks who are trying to make sense of this think it was probably too small, even with a vault, too small for him to actually like fully stretch out. So like a tiny little room, and Jeremiah is pretty old at this point, and so that confined small space is also hurting, physically, but the mental weight of like solitary confinement is also pretty terrible. And so Jeremiah is in that situation in this vaulted cell. And so I just love when Zedekiah says, you've been in prison. Now do you have a better word for me? And Jeremiah does not change his message at all. You are going to be handed over to the king of Babylon. But he calls back to the previous prophets, the very prophets that he warned the people not to listen to, the ones who said, Babylon is never going to come, peace, peace, when there is no peace, right? And so he's like, go ask them. They seem to be awfully quiet right now. Here's Babylon attacking us and has been attacking us. And they were wrong. And Jeremiah's like, I was right. I've done no wrong. I've committed no crimes. So why am I still being imprisoned? And Zedekiah listens to him here. Like the vaulted cell in the house of Jonathan, the secretary, is not a good place for Jeremiah to be. And so he puts him in the courtyard of the guard, which would have probably been between the temple and the palace. and there's more room there for Jeremiah to live. And he also is being provided with bread from the baker, the street of the bakers. And one of the things that little line, the street of the bakers, indicates to us is that Jerusalem, like so many other ancient cities, they were probably organized by districts with different trades in those districts. And so like all the bakers, or many of the bakers, would have been in one area. Many of the leather workers would have been in one area, and so those little details that we get in the scriptures are things to pay attention to that give us a picture into the ancient world, and especially Jerusalem, knowing that the city would be destroyed shortly after these events. So Zedekiah gives him a little bit of mercy, gives him a better place to fulfill his sentence, and then also provides bread for him. Doesn't last for very long. So chapter 38 picks up verse 1. And there's a lot of names here, so bear with me. Shephatiah, son of Matan, Gedaliah, son of Pashur, Jehukal, son of Shelemiah, and Pashur, son of Malchiah, heard what Jeremiah was telling all the people when he said, "This is what the Lord says, whoever stays in this city will die by the sword, famine, or plague, but whoever goes over to the Babylonians will live. They will escape with their lives, they will live. And this is what the Lord says, this city will certainly be given into the hands of the army of the king of Babylon, who will capture it." When the officials said to the king, "This man should be put to death, he is discouraging the soldiers who are left in this city, as well as all the people, by the things he is saying to them. This man is not seeking the good of these people, but their ruin. He is in your hands," King Zedekiah answered. "The king can do nothing to oppose you." So they took Jeremiah and put him into the cistern of Malchiah, the king's son, which was in the courtyard of the guard. They lowered Jeremiah by ropes into the cistern and had no water in it, only mud, and Jeremiah sank down into the mud. So Jeremiah, even though he is no longer in prison, he is still proclaiming the same message. If you want to live, you've got to leave. You've got to go. And surrender now, and it will be better for you. And he's saying this in the courtyard of the guard. So all the soldiers who are there are hearing him say, "Surrender, surrender, surrender." And so this cohort of officials, they're like, Zedekiah, he's really a bummer on morale here for our soldiers. And, why are we tolerating this? And so Zedekiah, he's a puppet king for Babylon, essentially, and he doesn't really have any power, it seems, or he's unwilling to stand up for Jeremiah. And so he's kind of like Pilate in the trial of Jesus. He's like, "I wash my hands of this. Like, he's in your hands. Do what you want. I am not going to do anything to him." And so they put him in this cistern. And a cistern is usually it's a dugout hole in the ground with some plaster on the side that would collect rainwater. And so here, the cistern is basically empty, and all that's left in there is just the mud on the bottom. And so it's enough mud that Jeremiah would sink into it, but he could never really be comfortable. He could never really rest. It's a terrible place to be. And so they put him in the cistern to try to essentially torture him, break him, maybe even like hoping that he would die in there. This is what these people want. So in verse 7, it says, but Ebed-Melech, a Cushite, an official in the royal palace, heard that they had put Jeremiah in the cistern while the king was sitting in the Benjamin gate. Ebed-Melech went to the palace, and said to him, "My lord the king, these men have acted wickedly in all they have done to Jeremiah the prophet. They have thrown him into a cistern where he will starve to death when there is no longer any bread in the city." Then the king commanded Ebed-Melech the Cushite, "Take 35 men from there with you Take 3 men there with you and lift Jeremiah the prophet out of the cistern before he dies. So Ebed-Melech took the men with him and went to a room under the treasury in the palace. He took some old rags and worn out clothes, and there he let them down with ropes to Jeremiah in the cistern. Ebed-Melech the Cushite said to Jeremiah, "Put these old rags and worn out clothes under your arms to pad the ropes." Jeremiah did so, and they pulled him up with the ropes and lifted him out of the cistern. And Jeremiah remained in the courtyard of the guard. So this is the surprising person who's coming to his aid, because this is Ebed-Melech the Cushite. Now, a Cushite is somebody from most people are saying Ethiopia or Sudan area, so south of Egypt. He's not a Hebrew person. Somehow he has become part of the royal counselors, and he may have converted to following Yahweh. He recognizes that Jeremiah is a good man who does not deserve the fate that he's experiencing, and he is willing to go and confront the king about this injustice. And so Ebed-Melech, whose name means servant of the king, he comes to Jeremiah's rescue. And so it's just interesting that a foreigner would come to the rescue of a Jewish prophet. And Jeremiah, later on in the book, he's going to have all kinds of messages for the nations that are coming against Jerusalem. But this is, even the foreigners see that the Jewish people are treating God's prophet with great disrespect. And so the king sitting at the Benjamin gate, often kings in Jerusalem, they would do business at the city gate. They would do their meetings. They would do like trials and that kind of stuff at the gates. And so Ebed-Melech goes to where the king is, and it's a public place, to confront him. And Zedekiah, in sending 35 men to go and rescue Jeremiah, he's saying, like, he's sending an army basically to save one man. And probably because if Ebed-Melech went with just a few people, the cohort of guys who tried to kill Jeremiah in the first place, they would have overpowered him. And so there's a intimidating force that is going to rescue Jeremiah, and pulls him up with these old rags and ropes to get him out of the cistern. And so Jeremiah is saved from the cistern, and Zedekiah asks for more. And he comes to Jeremiah again, starting in verse 14, and I'm going to read through 26. Then King Zedekiah sent for Jeremiah the prophet and had him brought to the third entrance to the temple of the Lord. "I'm going to ask you something," the king said to Jeremiah. "Do not hide anything from me." Jeremiah said to Zedekiah, "If I give you an answer, will you not kill me? Even if I did give you counsel, you would not listen to me." But King Zedekiah swore this oath secretly to Jeremiah: "As surely as the Lord lives, who has given us breath, I will neither kill you nor hand you over to those who want to kill you." Then Jeremiah said to Zedekiah, "This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says: If you surrender to the officers of the king of Babylon, your life will be spared and the city will not be burned down. You and your family will live. But if you will not surrender to the officers of the king of Babylon, this city will be given into the hands of the Babylonians, and they will burn it down. You yourself will not escape from them." King Zedekiah said to Jeremiah, "I'm afraid of the Jews who have gone over to the Babylonians, for the Babylonians may hand me over to them, and they will mistreat me." "They will not hand you over," Jeremiah replied. "Obey the Lord by doing what I tell you. Then it will go well with you, and your life will be spared. But if you refuse to surrender, this is what the Lord has revealed to me: all the women left in the palace of the king of Judah will be brought out to the officials of the king of Babylon. Those women will say to you, 'They misled you and overcame you, those trusted friends of yours. Your feet are sunk in the mud. Your friends have deserted you. All your wives and children will be brought to the Babylonians. You yourself will not escape from their hands, but will be captured by the king of Babylon, and the city will be burned down." Then Zedekiah said to Jeremiah, "Do not let anyone know about this conversation, or you may die. If the officials hear that I talked with you, and they come to you and say, 'Tell us what you said to the king, and what the king said to you. Do not hide it from us, or we will kill you,' then tell them, 'I was pleading with the king not to send me back to Jonathan's house to die there.'" So this is some covert, uh, you know, secretive meetings that Jeremiah and Zedekiah have. And this third entrance to the temple of the Lord, we're not really sure what that is, but most commentators were saying that it was probably a passage from the temple to the palace where Zedekiah could meet with Jeremiah without anybody knowing. And so, so he comes again saying, like, "Do you have any good news that the Lord is revealing to you?" And Jeremiah is consistent. It's like, no, just surrender and things will be better. But here we see Zedekiah is afraid that the Jewish people have already gone over to the Babylonians, that they'll kill Zedekiah. And so that's part of his motivation. And so one of the things that we see in Zedekiah is this fear of the others, of even his own people. And when a leader is operating out of fear, they usually aren't making good decisions. And so trying to save face, trying to preserve his own life, he's going to bring greater destruction on Jerusalem because he just is refusing to do what God says because he's afraid. He's afraid. And so, again, Jeremiah is like, "No, they won't kill you. But just if you don't do this thing, everything's going to go bad. And even your wives and the women who live in the palace, they're going to scorn you, and they're going to tell you that all of your advisors lied to you." And then little echo to Jeremiah's previous imprisonment: "Your feet are sunk in the mud." Jeremiah knows a thing or two about mud being in the cistern. But when your feet are sunk in the mud, I don't know if you've ever been in like really, really muddy terrain, but feeling stuck in the mud is like embarrassing, first of all, because you lose your shoes and stuff. But it's very frustrating. It's exhausting to try to get your feet out of the mud, and not knowing where to go. That's anywhere good for your feet because it's all mud everywhere you go. You're trapped. You're stuck. And so Zedekiah is on his own, essentially, is the message from Jeremiah to the king. So then Zedekiah threatens him, like, "If you tell anybody we talked, you may die." And that's not like it could happen. Zedekiah is essentially saying, "If you tell anybody, I'm going to kill you. I will have you executed." And so he instructs the prophet to lie on his behalf. If anybody asks, say, "You just were asking me not to send you back to Jonathan's house." So Zedekiah is in a bad way. In verse 27, it picks up, "All the officials did come to Jeremiah and question him, and he told them everything the king had ordered him to say. So they said no more to him, for no one had heard his conversation with the king. And Jeremiah remained in the courtyard of the guard until the day Jerusalem was captured." So he's like, "Yeah, I just didn't want to go to Jonathan's house." Jeremiah knows the fate of Jerusalem is on the wall, and because Zedekiah is unwilling to listen and surrender to the Babylonians, Zedekiah's fate is already sealed, essentially. And so part of Jeremiah's work now is just waiting for it all to happen. And so when you know bad things are going to happen and you just have to wait, that's really hard. That's a really hard place to be. And that's where Jeremiah is at this point in his ministry as a prophet. And so it closes there. He remained in the courtyard of the guard until the day Jerusalem was captured. So he's just in the temple area with the guards, just waiting. chapter 39, we start to see the fall. The end of 38 is actually, this is how Jerusalem was taken, and then goes into 39:1. In the 9th year of Zedekiah, king of Judah, in the 10th month, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, marched against Jerusalem with his whole army and laid siege to it. And on the 9th day of the 4th month of Zedekiah's 11th year, the city wall was broken through. Then all the officials of the king of Babylon came and took seats in the middle gate. Nergal-Sharezer of Samgar, Nebo-Sarsekim, a chief officer, Nergal-Sharezer, a high official, and all the other officials of the king of Babylon. So, siege lasts many months, and eventually they finally break through. And in the last chapter we saw Zedekiah setting up his court in the gate, and now here as a sign to us that ownership and control of Jerusalem has switched hands. The officials of Babylon are now setting up their court in the middle gate. And so Jerusalem has fallen. The official day, the siege of Jerusalem began in January of 588 BC, and it was breached in July 18 of 586 BC. And so the temple was destroyed in mid-August of the same year. And so Jeremiah has been warning them that this is going to happen for years, and nobody listened. And Zedekiah could have surrendered, and the city could have been spared. But once the wall is breached, then there's nothing really anybody could do. And so the city of Jerusalem has fallen. Verse 4, when Zedekiah, king of Judah, and all the soldiers saw them, they fled. They left the city at night by way of the king's garden through the gate between the two walls and headed toward the Arabah. But the Babylonian army pursued them and overtook Zedekiah in the plains of Jericho. They captured him and took him to Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, at Riblah in the land of Hamath, where he pronounced sentence on him. There at Riblah, the king of Babylon slaughtered the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes, and also killed all the nobles of Judah. Then he put out Zedekiah's eyes and bound him with bronze shackles to take him to Babylon. So instead of surrendering, as the city walls are breached, Zedekiah and his officials run away. But the Babylonian army is faster and bigger, and they capture them. And so the effort is to cross the Jordan. Their hope is to cross the Jordan and get into a dry space, almost like a deserty type space, and just make their way out. And but the Babylonians capture them. And the last thing Zedekiah sees with his eyes are his sons being killed and the officials being killed. And then they gouge his eyes out and bind him and take him to Babylon. Zedekiah never is released. We don't really know exactly when Zedekiah dies. This is the end for Zedekiah. And everything that Jeremiah said would happen has happened. And this is a common way, conquering kings would often humiliate the kings that they had conquered. And so the Assyrian Empire was pretty brutal with all of these things. Even in the conquest of Canaan by the armies of Israel, there were times where the kings that were being conquered, that were fighting against Israel, were also shamed. When we look at Samson, who was a judge, he wasn't a king, but he was a person of some authority over the people of Israel. When the Philistines captured him, they blinded him. And this is all a way to shame the people who have lost. And so Zedekiah is carrying that shame now. And after seeing Nebuchadnezzar face to face, he's now seen his sons executed, and he is now blinded. And Jeremiah predicted this, and it has all come to pass. Verse 8. The Babylonians set fire to the royal palace and the houses of the people and broke down the walls of Jerusalem. Nebuzaradan, commander of the imperial guard, carried into exile to Babylon the people who remained in the city, along with those who had gone over to him and the rest of the people. But Nebuzaradan, the commander of the guard, left behind the land of Judah some of the poor people who owned nothing, and at that time he gave them vineyards and fields. So the Nebuzaradan, he burns the palace and the houses and all these different things, starts taking the influencers out of the city, the officials, the wealthy, taking them all away, but gives the poor people these vineyards. And this is one of the ways to kind of earn some support from the people who are left behind, the overlooked and the forgotten, the poor, by giving them a way to provide for themselves and to make money. It's like, look how much better things are with the king of Babylon than they were with your own king. So you don't want to fight against us. You don't want to like rebel against us anytime soon. Aces, right? And so that's what Nebuzaradan is doing here by giving these vineyards to the poor. Yeah. So the temple is not mentioned here, but it is included in Jeremiah 52. We'll learn more about the destruction of the temple. Nebuzaradan is carrying out all of the things that Jeremiah said would happen to the city. It's happening at the hands of Nebuzaradan. So continuing on in verse 11, now Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had given these orders about Jeremiah through Nebuzaradan, commander of the imperial guard. Take him and look after him. Don't harm him, but do for him whatever he asks. So Nebuzaradan, the commander of the guard, Nebuchadnezzar, a chief officer, Nergal-Sharezer, a high official, and all the other officers of the king of Babylon sent and had Jeremiah taken out of the courtyard of the guard. They turned him over to Gedaliah, son of Ahikam, the son of Shaphan, to take him back to his home, so he remained among his own people. So Nebuchadnezzar saying to protect Jeremiah, it's not actually good news for Jeremiah to have the Babylonian king's favor. Like it doesn't help him with his reputation among his own people, really, to say like, yeah, look out for that guy. He's fine. But Nebuchadnezzar has probably heard that Jeremiah is the one who was saying like, just surrender and everything will be better. And so he's giving Jeremiah this extension of grace of sorts to say, go home to your people. You're fine. We're not going to hurt you. And so he does release him. And all of these Babylonian officials are like vouching for Jeremiah, which is not, again, it's kind of like having the mob say, you're a good dude. And so Jeremiah is probably going to have some people looking at him weird when he gets home. But yeah, he is treated well and he is released. This is also where we meet Gedaliah in verse 14. Gedaliah is the new puppet governor of this area after Jerusalem fell. And so Gedaliah is going to be overseeing the area of Jerusalem and Judah now, as a vassal of Babylon. So, and his father, Gedaliah's father, here's a note, Ahikam, had also earlier in chapter 26, we read about him. He protected Jeremiah. And then Gedaliah's grandfather, Shaphan, was mentioned when the law book was found during Josiah's reign. And so these are folks who've been a part of the religious system and, trying to be a part of reforms as well, if in Jerusalem at different points. And so he so Gedaliah being appointed here, he's a Jewish person who's being appointed to serve as a governor over Jerusalem, but still no real power. The power is all with Babylon. All right. So the narrative has been told, the city has fallen, Jeremiah has been restored, and then we take one step back, and in verse 15, and part of the reason why this story is placed here is because, as Jeremiah is being written out, the narrative, it makes sense that the narrative would just keep following the path of the destruction of the city. But earlier, before the city fell, in verse 15, while Jeremiah had been confined to the courtyard of the guard, the word of the Lord came to him, "Go and tell Ebed-Melech the Cushite, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. I am about to fulfill my words against this city, words concerning disaster, not prosperity. At that time, they will be fulfilled before your eyes, but I will rescue you on that day," being Ebed-Melech the Cushite. "I will rescue you on that day, declares the Lord. You will not be given into the hands of those you fear. I will save you. You will not fall by the sword, but will escape with your life because you trusted in me, declares the Lord." And so this promise to Ebed-Melech that he's going to live through all of the fall of Jerusalem is an encouragement. And it's there to say, yeah, look, all of this destruction happened, but it's a reminder to us that there were people even among those in Jerusalem who were faithful, and people like Ebed-Melech who were faithful to the Lord. Like, he protected them. Jeremiah, who was faithful to the Lord, he was released and was able to go home to the land that he purchased from his cousin. Like, that kind of stuff is happening even as the city itself is falling. And so so while it's not a guarantee to an easy and stress-free life, faithfulness to the Lord is part of what we should take away from this. Is faithfulness to the Lord is something that will help us to find peace and protection, and he will watch out for us, compared to Zedekiah, who was self-centered and fearful and unwilling to repent and trust the Lord. And Zedekiah found destruction and ultimately lost everything. So that is where we will stop tonight. Those are those three chapters. So the fall of Jerusalem. The next little section also continues more narratively, but yeah, we'll just stop there for tonight. Any questions, comments, thoughts?
I have a question.
Yes, Jane.
Okay, at the very beginning in 37,
Uh-huh.
1 says Zedekiah, son of Josiah, was made king of Judah by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little confusing because now Zedekiah is still fighting Babylon.
Yes.
Oh, I don't get it.
So,
what happened?
yeah. So Zedekiah is the son of Josiah. He is Jehoiakim's uncle. Jehoiakim rebelled against Babylon, and Nebuchadnezzar killed him and put Zedekiah in his place. Okay, so that's that palace intrigue and that political thing. Zedekiah, towards the end of his reign, and we read about this in First Kings more. It's not necessarily captured in Jeremiah, but towards the end of his reign, he's actually trying to find ways to get out from under Babylon. And so he's like,
even though they put him there.
Yeah. So he's kind of like, hey, Egypt, what are you going to do? Let's join with Egypt. And so even when Egypt comes to fight on their behalf and try to get Babylon's attention away from Jerusalem, Zedekiah is like, yay, Egypt. And Nebuchadnezzar is essentially saying, that is a terrible idea for you, Zedekiah. If you are cheering for Egypt to come and rescue you, I'm going to destroy your city. Because Nebuchadnezzar doesn't care about Zedekiah. he doesn't care that he put him in place. He wants loyalty and submission. And so Zedekiah, any sign of rebellion against the Babylonian army or the Babylonian Empire, that's all Nebuchadnezzar needs to justify killing
Yep.
Zedekiah. So, or capturing him and destroying his city. But that's more in Second Kings where we read about that.
Second Kings?
Yeah, I think I said First Kings earlier, but it's Second Kings. So
I looked it up.
yeah. And then also Chronicles, we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Second Chronicles.
Okay,
So
thanks.
yeah. Yeah. So the politics and the empires and all this stuff here at the end here is it gets very complicated with all the kings and the intrigue. So yeah, so good question. Any other questions, comments? No? All right.
I'll ask a question.
Yeah, Andrea.
Nebuchadnezzar and then I gotta read it.
Nebuzaradan.
Yes, thank you. Is there any, like, I just noticed that a lot of them are names sort of the same that are
Yeah.
in, alignment with one another. Is there any, formal, is that a thing or is it just a coincidence?
That first part of their name, Nebu, is
Yeah.
connected to their god.
Mm.
And so it's part of the it's a name that's honoring their god. And I don't know exactly what all of it means. Let me see if I captured that somehow. Yeah, so they're not necessarily related, but they are honoring the same deity in their naming. So yeah, here Nebuzaradan means Nabu has given offspring. And I don't know what Nebuchadnezzar means, but they're not necessarily like siblings. So
Well, I didn't mean that. I just meant that they were in some sort of alignment, they were part of the same group. I just noticed that,
Yeah.
it seems like there's a series of names and they're all very similar. And I was like, does that mean anything?
Yeah.
Like Brian and Ryan.
Yeah.
Are
Right.
Brian and Ryan related? Like, are those connected names?
Yes.
Are they for real?
Yeah, like Ryan's lesser than Brian because there's fewer letters.
Okay, so Brian is just a great Ryan.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Good to know. Yeah. So yeah, so
a better Ryan, maybe.
yeah. That's funny. So one of the things to note when we are looking at these ancient names and so like anytime you see Nebu, that is a connection to their god Nabu. When you look at even Hebrew names, if there's a ah at the end, that's usually connected to like some kind of pointing towards God, because they would refer to God as Adonai, as Yahweh, as Yah, as El. And so when you see Yah or El at the end of or in a Hebrew name, like Elijah, Elijah is the Lord is God. And so like those names will often have some kind of connection to the deity that the people worship in the ancient world, especially with kings, because kings would then sometimes take on a royal, a coronation name. And so they would have more, as a king, they would be representing God to their people as well. And so sometimes it's like, man, these kings, they all have the names all sound so familiar and similar, and it's very confusing, who's who. And often it would be no problem for them, but it's hard for us because we don't know the blocks of the name.
Mhm.
Whereas like all of these names have blocks, like German words. right? Where it's like 4 words crammed together. So yeah, but I'm not an expert in Hebrew, and I'm definitely not an expert in ancient Babylonian. So that's all I got. So,
No, I was just curious if that.
yeah, no, but that's a good question. Good note. Good to notice those kinds of things. So yeah, any other questions or thoughts? No? Carrie, I see you're in.
Yeah. I mean, I'm mute, right?
Yeah.
And pop my head up. I'm just, when I look at King Zedekiah being put into place because by Nebuchadnezzar, it almost seems like a cat and mouse game. He doesn't trust him, but he puts him in place anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You know, it's like a little dance they have going. Well, I'm going to put you here to make it look good, but I'm not going to trust you enough.
Yeah. Well, Zedekiah, as the brother of a former king, you know, he probably would have really liked to be king. And so he might have even gone to Nebuchadnezzar saying like, hey, I'll do what you say. I'll just make me king and I'll do what you say, you know, but we don't have all of the intrigue there. So
yeah, it's like, you be my puppet master. I'll be the, you know, I'll be the sham, you know, I will make it all look good. But
yeah. So it's and it was fairly common for these conquering kings to put their own person on the throne once they conquer. And so Babylon had already taken a bunch of people earlier in like 596. And so at that time in 596, when Babylon took a bunch of people, that's when Zedekiah was put in place. And so,
right,
yeah.
all for show. It doesn't seem like he does anything. He was just like a big, you know, somebody else was pulling things on him.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, Zedekiah is terrible. He's not a good king at all. So
no, and then he runs. Well, wouldn't you want that kind of leader on you? The minute things get tough, oh, I'm out of here. Bye.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, he's the worst. So, I mean, he's not the worst. There were worse kings, but he's terrible. So, for sure.
Yeah. I think it's amusing sometimes the Bible and how it goes into detail about like weird things about like grabbing clothes and shoving it, put this under your arms and we'll pull you up. Like it just seems like funny detail that like gets thrown in the middle of something that's kind of like a chronology, right? Like, oh, okay, now we're going to talk about the clothes and how we got him out of the well versus just saying, yeah, they went and yanked him out of the well.
Right.
There's interesting like detail in there about like the size of the crew that went to get him and that because there was people that wanted to harm him and the defense. But I'm always just like, it just makes me scratch my head sometimes. Like, why did they say they went and got old, specifically worn out clothes from the closets and told him to stick it under his armpits? And then he did it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And those little details are weird.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's also one of the reasons why we can trust the Bible. Like that's the kind of a detail that a firsthand person would have, and so Jeremiah, if he is dictating this to his scribe, or he's writing this himself as like a memoir for his own life, like these are the details that somebody who went through it would know,
Right. Yeah. Well, it's interesting because like it makes me think of it almost like he's telling the story, to your point. Oh yeah, you wouldn't believe what they did. They went and did this, and that's just what the scribe wrote down, right?
Yeah,
that kind of thing. But
right. So like the Jeremiah noting, like, well, yeah, I mean, if they're pulling me out of mud with ropes, that would have been really painful. And so they actually like wrapped it with clothes because they were thinking about it, right? Like they were like, we don't want to hurt you.
Yeah. Yeah, I was like, that's just interesting detail. But
yeah, I love those weird little details in the Bible. Like it's those kinds of things. It's just like, oh no, why would they include that if they weren't there?
Yeah.
So, like John in the Gospel of John, Mary comes and tells the disciples he's risen, and Peter and John run, and Peter goes first, but John was faster. It's like that little detail. This is like, those are two like basically best friends, end of John's life, wanting everybody to know I'm faster than Peter. So
I got there first. He left before me and I still beat him.
Yeah. So it's important. The world needs to know. So yeah. Good. Any other thoughts or observations?
Is there, I always, a lot of times when kings and or leaders, like you think about Caesar and like, or like, Pilate, and like when Jesus was like being brought out, there seems to be this thing where it's like they just kind of do the will of the horde that they're facing. Like, oh, he's yours now. You do
Yeah.
it. It's not on my hand. Like, that seems to be a pattern. I imagine that's probably just to buy goodwill from the people that could potentially turn on them. But is there any significance to that, or?
Well, part of like when we look at Pilate in particular, he did not want to be the one to create a riot.
Yeah.
Right. And so that was a lot of his rationale. But then he also has his wife telling him, like, hey, I had a dream about this. Don't get involved. And so that's Pilate's situation. With somebody like Zedekiah, he has no power and he's afraid. And so when a leader is afraid, they will listen to the loudest people.
Yeah.
And so the loudest people in Zedekiah's time were like, we need to go and arrest Jeremiah. And he's like, okay, it's because he's just afraid. So, yeah, we need leaders who are willing to do things that people won't like. And knowing that like even in, like they didn't have democracy back then, but even in elections, like you need a leader who's going to like say like, no, this is like what we actually need to do, even if it is going to be more expensive, right? Even if it is, we are going to have to raise taxes sometimes. That's going to happen. And nobody's going to like that. We need leaders who are willing to tell you these kinds of things. But it's hard to do when, like people can turn on me. And yeah, if you're only following leaders who just are chasing their popularity, then that's not a good situation.
Yeah.
So, that's what I have learned. So, yeah. Yeah, good questions, good thoughts, good observations.
Can I ask one question? How long did Jeremiah, when I was trying to do the math on this, how long did Jeremiah prophesy from the beginning till the day Jerusalem fell? It says it was from 626 BC to when the fall of Jerusalem happened in 587. Is that right?
Yeah, that's pretty close. I think that sounds right. Let me see
Off topic
here.
here, but it was weird, the number 40 years.
Mhm.
Another 40.
Yeah. Let's see. I have a chart in my last week's notes, so I'm closing those to open this new one. So he started
In Josiah.
well, he started in the last couple years of Manasseh. And then last couple years of Josiah. You're right, yeah. So 640 to 609 was Josiah. So yeah, I mean it would be around 40 years. Yeah, that he was prophesying in Jerusalem. So
yeah, and you know how you guys were just talking about, shoving the rags under your arm to make it all better. I wish there was something in this Bible where Jeremiah is sitting here going, I've been doing this for 40 years. Nobody's listening. Little side note here.
Well, I mean, that's part of his whole thing. Like earlier when he's like, he's like, I don't want to say these things. Partly because he knows nobody's going to listen. So, yeah. And then we'll see his grief in the coming chapters. And then in Lamentation, he's also going to be grieving the destruction, knowing that it was not necessary. So.
And then the part when Zedekiah comes to him secretly to have the conversation, is there anybody changed? You wish you had been a little bit more real. Have I said anything different? No, nothing's changed.
Right. Well, yeah.
He was far more polite than I think the majority of us would ever be.
I mean, he is talking to a king, so somebody who can't execute you. So, yeah. But yeah, Jeremiah, consistent, steady Eddie, just keep on saying the same thing. That's a good thing. So, all right. All right, y'all. Well, let's wrap there for tonight. We will be back next week, and we'll keep on moving through. I think I'll be able to do another 3 chapters if you're reading ahead. So go ahead and read ahead if you want to, and we'll come back together next week. See you Sunday, and y'all have a good night.